The words of King Solomon, the wisest of all men. For everything there is a time and a season, for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh and a time to weep. Then he goes on and says, a time of war and a time of peace, a time of love and a time to hate, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. So it's interesting, the way he introduces it is, for everything under heaven, there is a time and a season. What he's saying is that under heaven, meaning inside of creation, there is a time and a season for everything. The simple meaning is that this too shall pass. Everything has its time, everything has its season. The season passes and it's over. There's the winter season. In the winter season, it's cold. When the season is over, it's not cold anymore. So everything has its time and its season. This too shall pass. It's an important piece of wisdom. Because when you think you're perfect and everything is so great and you're sitting on top of the world, you have to be humbled by the thought that this too shall pass. And when you're down in the dumps, so one of the stories, I'm not sure where it comes from, one of the stories is that some king challenged a wise man and said, write something on the inside of a ring, a finger ring, jewelry. Write something that will be relevant and helpful at all times. It's quite a challenge. First of all, what is relevant at all times? Even if you wrote a book, could you do it? And here he asks him to put it on the inside of a ring, which means 3 words, at most 4. And that's when he came up with this. He said, this too shall pass. In Hebrew, that's 3 words. This too shall pass. Always relevant, no matter what's going on. And look at what, applying it to today. The person today who is healthy, unaffected in any way by the virus, this too shall pass. Financially, politically, you're perfect, but how long will that last? For everything there is a season. You'll retire eventually, no? And on the other extreme, God forbid, those who need to be healed and those who need to recover, this too shall pass. So it's amazing how these few words can be so eternal. It applies to everyone, it applies at all times and to every situation. Now people might say, well, death is forever, doesn't have a season. It's not temporary. But the Torah tells us that it is. The body, because it performed mitzvahs, will be rewarded it will be resurrected and given its reward. So death is, first of all, only the body dies because it doesn't have a life of its own. And even that is only temporary. What else does this tell us? For everything, there is a time and a season. It's not just that everything is temporary, but that when it does happen temporarily, it happens in the right time and in the right season. Like a diamond that is perfect needs a setting that is appropriate. Even the most perfect, most beautiful diamond, if you put it in a bad setting, it ruins it. It ruins the beauty. So everything needs its proper setting, its proper context. So Shlomo HaMelech says, everything, the worst and the best, have the appropriate time for them to happen. A few sentences later, he actually says, everything is beautiful in its time. So the perfection, the significance, the meaningfulness of everything that happens is not only in the event itself, but in the timing. It's never the wrong time, just like it's never the wrong thing. So being followers of the Baal Shem Tov, we know that the Baal Shem Tov introduced this insight, revealed this insight, that everything happens by specific divine plan. Specific, meaning God doesn't just plan the big events and then the little stuff follows automatically, but specific. Hashgacha prati. Divine providence applied individually, personally, to every movement, every event, everything. Nothing moves without a divine plan because it can't. It has no steam of its own. It's important to know. And the Baal Shem Tov made sure that we would know, which maybe in earlier generations was not so familiar. But the Baal Shem Tov told us, and we need to hear this and we need to know this. When people die at war, during a war, it's not the war that kills them. The war becomes the method, but that's not what kills them. Nobody dies because there's a war going on. Nobody dies because there's a plague and you didn't get out of the way fast enough. So it's not enough to say everything comes from God, nothing happens by itself. So this virus was introduced into the human system by divine plan. This could never happen by itself. God doesn't abandon lives to a virus. But then we might conclude that once God decides that there's going to be a virus, well then watch out. Who knows who is going to get it? So the Baal Shem Tov said, no. Just like God does not abandon lives to an illness, He doesn't abandon a single life. So nobody dies because there's a virus. And this is where we have to, our morality has to be focused. When people get very upset, why is God allowing this? First of all, he's not allowing it. There is no force in nature that is causing this, and God has to fight against it or intervene and not allow. There is no force of nature doing this. Nature has no force. Nature is obedient to its creator. Only human beings have freedom of choice and can disobey. So the question is, why does anybody ever die? That is our moral response. We object to death all the time, any time, no matter what the final papers say as to cause of death. It doesn't matter what caused it. We have to object. Death is not useful, as far as we can tell. And every time it happens, wherever it happens, it should hurt. A loss of life is a terrible thing. Terrible. If in the end there is something good, we're not supposed to be comforted by that. We're supposed to object to death. So to say, oh, it's very upsetting, people are dying from a plague. Death was introduced when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. It's been bad ever since. We don't get comfortable with it. We don't justify it. And it doesn't matter what the cause was. Now, obviously, it is more shocking when a young person dies than an older person. It's more shocking when a person dies suddenly or dies well into their 90s or over 100. But that's so artificial. Why is this death better than the other or less tragic than the other? It's just we're getting a little jaded. So if it's not a horrendous death, we shrug it off, which we shouldn't do. So it doesn't matter what the cause of death is. We object to death. We object to the world being filled with pain, with the unknown, the mysteries. If there is something wonderful about people dying, then why don't we see it? Why can't we see it? And as long as we don't see it, we're not supposed to make peace with it. This is the essence of Torah. The most shocking thing, the most surprising thing that God told us in the Torah is to feed the poor. Yes, it's shocking because God makes people poor and then tells us to feed them. So does he want them to be hungry or does he want them to not be hungry? God puts people in danger, but then he commands us to not stand by when another person's blood is being threatened. God makes illness, but then he tells doctors to heal it. Without the Torah, we would not know this. And we would rationally assume whatever God does, it's his world. Whatever he does is fine. So if he makes people hungry, let them be hungry. If he makes people sick, let them be sick. How dare you intervene? How dare you interfere? with God's plan. And there are people who still believe it today. God's will be done, and you stay out of it. The Torah tells us over and over again, God is asking that we help him in certain areas and we stay out of other areas. In fact, fight him in other areas. We are partners in creation, not silent partners, active partners. And so when we see people suffering, we have to defend them. We have to argue in their favor. We have to insist that they don't deserve this, even when God says they deserve to suffer. That's God's business. Our business is to say, no, they're not so bad. Even the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So, there's no question that the bad news is as bad as always. We don't need to dwell on that. We haven't lost our sensitivity. We haven't lost our objection to pain, to suffering, to fear, to the unknown. That's the worst part of the whole thing. It's unknown. Why do things have to be mysterious? Why do things have to be hidden and concealed? So, of course, we still object. But God opened our eyes to some degree to see at least some of the mysteries in history and life, in the way God runs the world. One of the things we were told, in addition to the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, is the Rebbe's teachings. Always positive. Always think positive. That not only makes you feel good, it makes the world better. If you think positive, you create positivity. The world is not fixed. For everything there is a season. Who determines that season? To some degree we do. When we go negative, it becomes a negative season. When we are positive, it becomes a positive season. A few more interesting things from King Solomon. There's a time to speak and a time to be silent. Why is there a time to be silent? What is the virtue of silence? He mentions a time to die and a time to be born. But he doesn't mention a time to be nothing. A time to do nothing. There's no time to do nothing. There's always something, right? So a time to live and a time to die, to be born and a time to die. King Solomon is not bemoaning that. He's not complaining about it. He's talking about everything being meaningful and appropriate in its time. So what is a time to die? Until Mashiach comes, from the time we ate from the tree of knowledge, it is a time to die. To die means to put an end to all the negativity that you've accumulated, get back to heaven, refresh your soul, and come back and try again. There's a time for that. So nothing that he mentions here, time for war, a time for peace, war doesn't mean something horrible and negative. There's a time when you resist evil, there's a time when you pursue the good. Resist evil is war. So one of the things that he mentions is a time to speak and a time to refrain from speaking. To refrain from speaking means not that you have nothing to say. There's nothing virtuous about that. There is no set time for having nothing to say. There's no such time. But there is a time to refrain from speaking, refrain from saying what you have to say. Not because what you have to say is wrong. You don't need King Solomon to tell us that. What he's saying is, sometimes the wisdom you're carrying can be conveyed in words, and sometimes it's conveyed in not saying it. Sometimes by your silence, you say more than your words could possibly say. One of the insights into exile: has God abandoned us? Is this forever? So one of the examples given in Hasidus is a teacher who is very devoted to his students. And he's teaching. There's a class going on. He's teaching, he's explaining, he's sharing his wisdom. It's wonderful. Students love it. And then all of a sudden the teacher falls silent. And he's lost in thought. The previous Rebbe writes in his diary, when he was a teenager, he was walking with his father in the streets, I think, in Germany. And his father was explaining something to him. It was profound, it was holy, and people walking by stopped to stare at his father because of the beauty and the wisdom that was visible on his face. They took a double take. And he was in heaven. When his father taught him, when his father explained things to him, it was the best time in his life. And then all of a sudden his father stopped and was lost in thought. And the Rebbe writes how he felt abandoned, alone, because his father was now in a different universe, very far from him. He felt tiny. But then he realized his father wants to tell him something he has never told him before. He wants to explain something that is much deeper than anything they have studied before. But to do that, he's got to find the right words. Every diamond needs the proper setting. So what his father is doing is not abandoning him, hasn't lost interest in teaching him, hasn't lost interest in speaking to him. On the contrary, something magnificent is coming. It's not abandonment. It is a deeper devotion. It's one thing to just share thoughts that are on your mind with someone you like. It's a completely other thing when you dig deep to find the right words to say things that are not conventional. They're not on the tip of your tongue. That expresses a deeper commitment, a deeper devotion, a deeper bond with the person you're teaching or talking to. Reading the previous Rebbe's diary was, when I did this as a teenager, I discovered what Hasidim were and what Hasidus was and what a Rebbe is. It's just beautiful stuff. And if you happen to have a free moment, could be, huh? Take a look at the Rebbe's diary. It's called Likutei Diburim. It's available in English, I think 4 volumes. Look it up in Kehas publications. At any rate, this is used as a mushal to explain what exile is. It seems like God stopped talking to us. It seems like he has nothing more to say to us. It seems like he's abandoned us. No, on the contrary. Something deeper is coming, and that needs preparation. That applies to today also. Things were pretty good. Life was comfortable for many, and getting better for most. And now this. And you hear people online, very sad, very wrong. You hear people online saying, it's because of this sin and that sin, and we're not behaving properly. And now you see the consequences of your misbehavior. Now you're going to get it. Please. First of all, don't put words in God's mouth. Did you hear from God that he's angry? Did you hear what he's angry about? So what are you speculating so critically, so nasty? Why are you assuming that people deserve to suffer? It's wrong. It's wrong-minded, and it goes against everything the Baal Shem Tov stands for. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.